Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a virtual tour of South Uist with me, Vanessa Wright. Thank you for joining me here on these islands today, and welcome to Mindfulness Week. I hope to bring you some of the wildlife that shares these island shores with me in South Uist, and what we will be doing is we will be visiting the machair, the moor, the shore and around the croft. So I thought it would be a lovely event for this week, as even looking at photos of nature is known to be beneficial to our well-being and mental health. And even in hospital, recoveries can be sometimes deemed quicker when you have access to nature and natural views. I personally use nature and my photos for my writing. They're an aid memoir, and I think what happens with that for me is it enables me to relive that experience through the photographs I take. So it's really lovely to be here. I'd love to hear from you in the chat where you're dialing in from and where you're based today. So I'm going to share my screen now and we'll get started. So welcome. And I hope we're having a few little technical issues. So I hope I can still see your chat because I'd love this to be a little bit of a share, and you know, we can interact as we join today. So I would love to hear, first of all, has anyone actually been to the Outer Hebrides before? If you don't know where it is, it's a chain of islands off of the northwest coast of Scotland. And that would be lovely to hear whether you visited yourselves. So first of all, our first stop, I'm going to take you to Hallen. And this is a really beautiful place that's the closest beach to me. And this is a really important place because there was a Bronze Age settlement here. And it's where I spend most of my time walking, all day, all times of day, all night, in all weathers, in all seasons. And so I thought this would be the most obvious place to start. So to reach the beach, we go over what is known as machair, and that's a Scottish word. And this is the flowers that are covering what is known as the machair. They're meadows, they're wildflower meadows, but they're a very rare and precious habitat that's unique to the west, some spots in Western Ireland, but also of West of Scotland. But in my view, South Uist and North Uist are where the very best examples of this special wildlife, flower meadow are. And it's a fertile soil based on fragments of seashells, and it's managed by the environment and the crofters. And it hosts a great diversity of plants. There's some really rare orchids here. It's home to the rare greater yellow bumblebee. And it's very special in terms of the nesting birds that also use this place as their home. So these are, what I love about the machair is through the season, sort of starting end of May, going through to June, July, it's effectively like waves of colour that wash over the meadow. And right at the beginning of the season, it's predominantly white, where you have all of the daisies and the white clover. So the previous slide that I shared was sort of more towards the beginning of the season.
Hi, Vanessa.
Yes.
I'm hoping you can hear me on the back.
Okay.
Your shared slides haven't appeared, so I've not been able to present them. If you could just add those in to the session, and I'll have to
let me try again. Okay, let's see. Can you see that now?
Yes, they're up there now for you.
Beautiful. Okay, apologies for that. So I'll give you a quick show of Hallen, which was the beach that is my favourite beach and where I walk over. And then the machair, which is what I described. This is the beginning of the season where you have the white daisies. And then you have, this is where we are now, which is the pink clover. So it morphs into pink clover and sea thrift. And then the final kind of wave are the purple harebells, which are really fine petals. And it's really beautiful. So I just thought I'd put in the chat, what are your favourite flowers? What do you associate with the summer? Because this is one of the spectacles that we have here on South Uist over the summer. And it's really beautiful to watch the season going along as spring goes to summer into autumn. So I just thought I'd ask you what your favourite flowers are. So thank you for that. So as I mentioned, the machair is really important for a lot of nesting birds that are either endangered or vulnerable. And this bird here is my favourite bird, which is the oyster catcher. And I love it because it's ever present. It's here all year round. Their numbers are boosted in the winter when we have birds flying down from Iceland and Scandinavia, but they're always here. And I always find their peeps really uplifting. And they're very bold birds. You always see them. And even in a dark day when the weather is wild, their bright orange beaks illuminate, I think, they're little beacons. And they're said to be a bird that helps people navigate the storms, because they always try and return to land. So they're really important. And the machair is a really critical place for the oyster catcher, lapwings, skylarks, and there's a whole cacophony of sound. But also, they're also home to a really special bird that's very rare and protected. And I don't know if anyone has heard of the corncrake. And I'd love to know whether you've seen or heard one. They're very difficult to see. They come from Africa and they arrive here on these Uist shores and the Outer Hebrides more broadly on the west coast. And you often hear them at night, and they're extremely difficult to see. But they're just a brilliant bird. So I thought I'd just see whether this works and play you just a snippet. So that's just a little snippet of their call. And I often hear them as it gets, well, it doesn't really get very dark in the summer here, but just as at night, as you're going to bed, they often start up. And I love listening to them. And I actually did see one at midnight when I was dressed in my pajamas, because I could hear it and I couldn't see it. So I was walking along a path to try and locate it, and I did actually see it under the full moon, but it wasn't good enough to be able to take a photo of it. So I'd love to hear what your favourite bird is. So this is a lovely picture of an oyster catcher, which, as I said, was one of my favourites. So yeah, I'd love to hear what your favourite bird is.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hello.
We have some technical difficulties again. Your flowers screen slide is still showing, so I think the next one is probably your oyster catcher. So whether you can just click that one. There we go. It's on.
Ah, okay. That's a bit strange. Let me see. You can see that, can you?
Yes, I can see the oyster catcher picture now, the frame of birds.
Oh, I wonder if something went wrong. I'm going to just try again. Let me know. Can you see the church, Howmore?
Yes, Howmore slide is now showing.
Okay, great. What I'll do just because we're having some technical difficulties, I'll just make sure that for every slide I move across it, you can still see it. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's going on with the technical side, but we'll just go with it, and hopefully we'll get through this. So a little further up the coast is a lovely place called Moor. And this is deemed to be one of the most spiritual sites in South Uist, and has been a place of pilgrimage. And there's evidence of lots of churches and chapels here since the 9th century. This one is obviously the most modern, but sitting behind that church is lots of Celtic crosses and the graveyard. And I always think that this church here is like a porch light on a dark night, because you can see it from miles away. Even when the weather is poor and the visibility is reduced, it sort of gleams like a beacon on a lighthouse from miles away. So whenever I'm walking or even driving on the road, you can see it from miles away. So this is another one of my favourite spots that I like to walk. And again, I've taken this just before the machair has come out, but sometimes this field in front of the church is full of wildflowers in the summer. So I'm moving on now to the shore. I'm hoping you can see that. Andrea, can you see that?
No, we're still on the Moor slide.
Okay, this is Jane. There's something not quite right with it's for some reason. Yeah, for some reason it's not liking me forwarding the slide. But what I'll do is, I apologise, this is a little clunky, but what I'll do is I'll kind of come in and out every time just to make sure you can see it, and I will double check. So this is the shoreline at Moor at its calmest, but this is quite an exposed piece of beach where the wild weather comes in from the Atlantic. But that means that whenever there's a storm, it's always a really good place for beachcombing finds. And if you join me on Thursday, we'll have a tidal treasures session where I will share some of the things I found on this shoreline. So I'd love to know where your favourite beach is, and you know, where you love to spend the time when you do go to the shoreline and the sea. So this one is my favourite. So I am just going to re-share my screen again, because I've just changed the slide. So I'm hoping now you can see my waders picture. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see waders.
Beautiful. So I wanted to, now we're coming into winter, it can sometimes feel a little bit more tricky to get out when the weather's wet or windy or a little bit wild. And I thought I would share some of the reasons to go to the sea in the winter and get down to the coast, because we often think of the beach in the summer because that's when most people go. But in the winter, it's a really great time for the birds, and that's when the birds often arrive. And so at this time of year, we're really starting to see the migration of all the winter waders that nest up in the Arctic, in Iceland, in Scandinavia, and they're arriving in good numbers by the day. And these birds that are on the screen just now are sanderlings. And I think they're like little clockwork shore mice as they scuttle along the surf. And this is them in their winter colours. So by the time they come here, they're kind of silvery, white, grey, sometimes matching the colours of the sea and the sky at this time of year. But in their breeding colours, when they go back north, they're a lot more russet and rust. But these are lovely, tiny little birds, and I can watch them for hours as they kind of move around in little groups. But standing on the shoreline with them, as I mentioned before, the oyster catchers gather in numbers at this time of year, along with the curlew, which is the biggest wader. And we often find the bar-tailed godwits, which are somewhere in between medium-sized waders on the shoreline as they're making their way. The longest migration, I think, for a bar-tailed godwit was from Alaska all the way down to Australia. So it's crazy how far these birds travel. And even this week, I found an oyster catcher that was standing on Howmore Beach, and it was tagged. And I sent the tag, I put the kind of photo of the bird with its tag on Twitter to try and find out where had this bird come from, because obviously it'd been part of a project. And it turned out that it was part of Project Iceland Wader. And this little bird had been on the northwest, it was born on the northwest coast of Iceland in 2022. And even in its first winter, it made its way to this same Howmore Beach. And it's come back and forth ever since. And I've seen it, and other people have seen it on the beach and recorded it. And I just think, how amazing is that you can track an individual bird's life as it flies all of these miles. It's 800 miles to Iceland. And they're not that big birds. So anyway, I just find it one of those miracles of nature. So I just wondered whether you enjoy going to the coast, looking at the birds that are on the coast, because they're so different to the birds that are in our gardens. And this is a really good excuse of time of year to get out to the shoreline and see what's coming and what's arriving. So on that note, I'm just going to come out again and just check. You can see my picture of the geese. Can you see the geese?
Yes, the geese are showing.
Brilliant. So as well as the waders, this is a fantastic time of year to see thousands of geese arriving. Again, they're coming from the north. And these ones here are barnacle geese. And they're just so beautiful. I mean, when you look closely at these birds, you know, the markings on their wings, they're almost smoky and charcoal. And the noise, this was... I'd photographed these as they were coming overhead in a great big flock of 1,000 birds. And my favourite ones are the Brent geese, which are the tiniest geese that come to our shores, and they're very charcoal and smoky. And depending on where you are in the country, you'll see different species of geese arriving. So here in the Hebrides, I look out for the barnacle geese and the Brent geese arriving. But on the East Coast, you might get thousands of pink-footed geese, which are coming in. I know the numbers are already being seen in Scotland, and I think they're coming to East Anglia as well now. I think they've made it to there already. But if you get to the coasts, and I think there's something really wonderful about hearing all of their wing beats. They chatter to each other. And it's just really fascinating to learn that they all swap positions. So a different bird takes the lead and then they swap over. So somebody, it's like cycling in a peloton where you get the benefit from the person in the front. And then they sort of take it in turns. So I just think it's wonderful. Again, another reason to get out to the coast at this time of year is to see all of the wildfowl arriving from the north. So look up to the skies and see the V formations, the skeins of geese. And it's just kind of, for me, watching the migrating birds arriving, it's just a wonderful reminder that the world is still working when there's lots of things that, create anxiety around us. The natural world's still turning and the seasons are still working as you see these migrations happening. So again, I'm just going to come out and come back in to make sure you can see the next slide. So I'm hoping that you can see a picture of an otter.
Yes, we have otters.
Beautiful. I love the otter, and in the summer they're a lot more elusive because there are people. There aren't many people that even in the summer I can be the only person on the beach. But there's even fewer people in the winter, and I barely ever see anybody on the shores here in the winter. And I love watching out for the otter. I usually see traces of them. So you'll often see their droppings on the dunes. I always look out for their tracks to and from the sea. Unlike a dog, that the tracks are kind of random when you see a dog running around. The otter likes to have the quickest route from its holt up in the dunes down to the sea. So there'll be a direct straight line down into the water. And I always see their tracks, but they're very elusive and they're difficult to spot. But it is such a treat when you see one. And they're just sometimes just the most fleeting of glimpses. And often I think, is that a rock? Is it a piece of seaweed? You just have to wait and watch and see. Often it is a rock or a piece of seaweed. But sometimes you'll just see that little nose and the ears and the eyes popping out of the water before you then see the back porpoising back down into the waves again. And I just find it incredible how they're just at one with the sea, and that they just, you know, navigate the waves, even in the roughest of storms, with such grace and ease. They're just wonderful to watch. But this one was one that actually ran along the surf line because I was sitting downwind, which is a good tip if you do want to see one, so they can't smell you. And because the visibility was poor and their eyesight isn't brilliant, it did come out, and I surprised it because it didn't realize I was there. So then it hot-footed it along the shore back into the waves outside. But I did get this very briefest of pictures of it. And I just wondered whether anyone else has ever seen an otter and how special that sighting is. And, you know, there's a lot of joy in the looking for wildlife. And then you do get a dopamine hit when you do find what you're looking for. But just in case you want some tips and you're down by the shoreline, the best times to see an otter is, I find, around dusk, usually around an hour before dusk. Now, in the summer, that's obviously very late indeed. But in the winter, that means, you know, it can get dark here 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. But it means it's a very acceptable time of day to be watching otters. But the other tip is looking at when the tide has turned and it's coming from low tide into high tide. It's a really good time for them to fish. And you'll often see them either eating fish as they're swimming, and they literally have the fish in their front paws, or they'll take, say there'd be a tricky crab, they'll take that to a rock. So I have a little otter rock that I always look out for, and what we do, you know, and it will kind of, you'll have a moment of it dissecting the crab before it disappears back into the water. But they're one of the most elusive animals to see, but it's such a joy when you see them. So that's a little bit about the shore. And I'm now going to take you to Loch Drúžibeg. Now, my Gaelic is absolutely terrible, but I am trying to learn the language. So can you see Loch Drúžibeg there?
Yes, we can.
Great. So this is an RSPB reserve, and this is more over to the east. Now, there's 25 miles of shoreline on South Uist, and so I spend most of my time on the beaches, on the shore. I just love being by water and by the sea. But Loch Drúžibeg is over on the east side of the island, and it looks quite different. It's very rugged. There's an amphitheatre of mountains that surrounds the loch that is here. This view is actually the view out to the west, over towards the Atlantic. And it's famous for its so-called wild ponies that aren't really so wild. They do approach, and they're pretty friendly. But the other thing about Loch Drúžibeg here is the islands typically are very flat, very windswept, and they don't have any trees, but there is the tiniest of pockets of woodland at Drúžibeg here. But what I will say is it's one of the best places on the island to see eagles, both golden eagle and the white-tailed eagle, as well as the other raptors. So I've seen the short-eared owl here. I've seen hen harriers, kestrel. There has even been a sparrowhawk nesting in the little spot of woodland here. So it's a really lovely place. And and it's a very different kind of habitat. So here is, I'm just going to share with you, make sure you can see the picture of the moor.
Yes, we can see that.
Hang on. Oh. Can you still see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, great, thank you. So this is a picture of the moor, and in the late summer, so August, late August, going into September is one of the best times to see the display of heather in all of its pink and purple blooms. In the spring, it's full of gorse, that's sunshine yellow. But this is very precious bog habitat here, and the peat bogs are really important both in terms of cultural heritage, but also in terms of wildlife here. And this is one of my favourite times of going into Loch Jujibeg, is when you have these displays of the heather here. And it's a really important place for bog plants, so some rare plants. So this is, hopefully you can see this. I'm wondering if anyone knows what this plant is. I like to think it looks a bit like a solar system with the sun in the center and the planets all around. And this plant is a really special plant. It's the sundew plant. I wonder if anyone knows why it's so special. Because it lives in peat bog, and it's quite an extreme environment to survive in for plants. It's very low in nutrient. The soil is very low in nutrition. So what this plant does is it obviously has a special kind of smell that attracts flies, and it's a bit like a Venus flytrap. It's carnivorous, so it traps midges and mosquitoes, and that's how it sources its nutrients, which again is just so clever, isn't it, for an organism that can't move. So that's a little bit about some of the plants there. And as I mentioned, it's a really special place for birds of prey. And I'm just going to check that you can see this picture here. This is a picture of a white-tailed eagle at Jujibeg. And the last 2 out of 3 years, there's even been a nesting pair on the far side of the loch. There's a tiny tree. As I mentioned, it's one of the only places on the island with trees. And a pair have constructed a nest and raised chicks there, which is wonderful to know that this bird is starting to really come back and be introduced. And I wonder whether anyone else has seen an eagle in other parts of the UK. There've been some introduction projects on the south coast down in the Isle of Wight. And I know frequently that the eagles that have been introduced there have been soaring around the south coast. Have gone as far up as East Anglia, I think, on some of their travels. So I just wondered whether anyone else had seen any of the white-tailed eagle, and you can't miss the eagle, really. They say if you have to question whether it's an eagle or not, it's a buzzard, often known as the tourist eagle. But if you see an eagle, you'll know, because it's enormous. And you can see this picture here, just how deep and broad those wings are. And obviously just the size of the beak. And in Scottish Gaelic, it's called the Ailer Nasul, and apologies for my accent if anyone is a native speaker, but that translates as the eagle with the sunlit eye, which I think is really beautiful. And I will never tire of seeing these birds. It's, you know, I see them fairly regularly because they go from the hills to the sea and back again. But you never tire of seeing them, and they're so enormous that, you know, you see their dark silhouette against the sky. And they don't seem to mind people that much, as you can see here. I don't have a brilliant camera, but you know, this one literally flew over my head, which was just incredible. But also, as I mentioned, it being one of the only places with trees, I'm just going to check you can see this. Again, this is something that we sometimes see coming to the UK is the waxwing. And I wondered I'd love to hear how you would describe this bird, the waxwing. It's just a beautiful bird, and we don't have many trees here, so we rarely get waxwings. But last year was what they called a waxwing winter, where there was a huge influx of these birds all over the UK. And I wonder whether you caught sight of one where you were. And they come as visitors when they've had a bad year of berries in Scandinavia, and they come over. And usually, if they do come at all, they pretty much stick to the East Coast, and they typically don't really fly that much further south than Scotland or the north of England. But last year, they must have had really bad berries in Scandinavia, because one, they came over to the Outer Hebrides in South Uist at Drujibeg, and two, they even were found in central London, in Balham, of all places, out in the open, not minding people at all. It's really quite incredible how, accessible this bird is to being seen when it does have one of those winters where it does come over. So that's another thing to look out for this winter. It's not just coastal sites or remote sites. It does, as I said, it's even come into the centre of our cities. It just wants to feed on the berries, to fatten itself up and get through the winter. So I just thought it would be interesting to ask whether anyone else caught sight of one of these waxwings last winter, when it really was quite an incredible sight. And now I thought I would share with you the view from my house at the croft, and to share a little bit about the wildlife that's from here. Can you see this, Andrea?
Yes, we can see the croft.
Great, thank you. So this is the view from my window, and obviously I live in a wilder landscape than most, but you never know what surprises might come from where you're standing. And one of the things I love about South Uist in particular is because it's really flat, you get such big skies and big sunsets. And at this time of year, when the weather is not raining, you can get some really impressive fiery skies that linger long into the night. So the sun's, even though you might have sunset, it tends to linger. Particularly in the summer, you can have sunsets that last for hours, and it's like a kaleidoscope. The color changes by the minute, and I can't stop going outside and clicking this. This is just taken from my phone. But they're just such fiery skies, big skies. That's one of the reasons why I love it, is because of that. But you never know what turns up. So I thought I'd share a few little stories with you. Hopefully you can see the cuckoo and the pipit. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Beautiful. So last year, I remember I was writing at my desk and just looking out of the window, and this was back in, I think it was April, and I saw a cuckoo chasing around after a pipit. And I thought, oh my goodness, what the hell's that? And the pipit was flapping its wings furiously. And I realised it was trying to distract the mother cuckoo from laying an egg in the pipit's nest. And I could see the pipit trying to distract the cuckoo. It was flying away, and I didn't know whether the bird had successfully laid an egg in another's nest. Obviously, you know that cuckoos are, they're effectively a parasite, because they will lay an egg in another bird's nest. And when that young cuckoo hatches, it will kick out the parent bird, the original parent bird, in this case, the pipit. But often they will lay eggs in the dunnock nest, for example, down south. And so what the little bird will be raising a cuckoo chick instead. So I saw all this commotion outside the window and didn't know whether the cuckoo had been successful or not until the July. And this is a photo of the cuckoo in July. And the cuckoo is sitting on the fence post outside my window. And the meadow pipit is on the cuckoo's back because it just delivered a beak full of food. And I've got loads of shots of this. And there was two birds feeding this ever-begging cuckoo for food as it was chasing around the croft. And I've never seen anything quite like it. And it was almost, you know, whenever the pipit would deliver its meal, it was almost like it was swallowing the pipit. You know, the beak and the gape was so wide. So again, it's just incredible, you know, and cuckoos are really precious birds. They're very rare, but, you know, you're kind of torn, aren't you, between the parasite, the prey, and it's just nature. It's just looking at the different cycles of success and failure, and that's how our ecosystem works. But I found it incredible to watch over a series of days this bird, you know, these tiny parent birds, parent in inverted commas, feeding this huge cuckoo chick. So quite incredible, really. And then I'm also I've been surprised. This was from earlier this year. And again, I was just sitting writing, and I was at my desk, and I've been where the croft is situated is in a patch of moorland, and it's very near a loch. And between the croft and the loch, I've been seeing a short-eared owl fly, and you know, quite a way off in the distance. Not brilliant photos, but still really exciting to know that there's a short-eared owl around, because they're one of the only owls that you'll see in the daytime. And I knew that there was a nest because I could see the owl going to and fro somewhere in the heather in the moorland. And obviously the mother owl is very busy provisioning for the chicks. And I happened to look up, and the short-eared owl was probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 meters away from me on a fence post. And I just think, look at the eyes, they're just so beautiful. And the markings, the speckledness, they're just beautiful birds. And these birds will be leaving South Uist. We do get a couple that sometimes remain, but this is often the time of year when they'll fly south. I saw her a couple of days ago, so I know she is still around. But I think very soon they will be going south. And sometimes you'll see them, you know, I know they've been sighted around County Durham, the south coast, so they'll fly further south just to have a little less wild winter. Because sometimes I do wonder, in the wild gales we have up here, how on earth they hear the voles that are their prey. And whenever there's a good vole year, there's always a good short-eared owl ear that shortly follows. So I know this year has been a good vole year. I've seen the voles on my lawn. And again, you're kind of in this predator-prey, you know, you're watching this predator-prey dynamic play out as you see the owl hunting for its quarry. But it's wonderful to watch. And then the other thing is, again, I don't know, can you see this picture of the red deer?
Yes, we can see the deer.
Great, fantastic. So, I was going to say, sorry, about the short-eared owl. The Gaelic name for the short-eared owl translates as old lady. So they always call the owls here she. And I used to think it was because they respected the owl for the wisdom and being a wise woman. But apparently it's because their shriek sounds like a witch, which wasn't as nice a description. But I like to still think that they call it an old lady because she's a wise woman. So I would now like to introduce you to one of the bachelor brothers who I remember one morning getting up and making a cup of tea and opening the curtains, only to find through the kitchen window this beautiful stag staring back at me. And you just have one of those moments when you don't know who is more surprised, the deer or you. But it was just carried on eating the grass outside the kitchen window. And this is one of the bachelor brothers. They come down from the hills. I haven't heard them. I went out last night because it was going to be a good Northern Lights night, except there was so much cloud you couldn't really see that much. But I stood outside and listened, and I could hear the call of the curlew, and I couldn't hear any rutting red deers yet. But any time now, even if you go to somewhere like Richmond Park, you'll hear the rutting roars of the red deer stags, which sort of go through your bones and your body. It's really kind of, it's a really moving sound, a really stirring sound. But by the time winter comes, they're friends again. And these rutting red stags, like there's a pair of them, come down from the hills and they eat the grass and the heather, usually down on the moorland between the croft and the loch. But this one particular morning, they decided they wanted fresh grass just outside the kitchen window. So I wondered if you have seen any deer where you are. This one's obviously the red deer, but there's lots of different species of deer in the UK. Obviously, the muntjacs are quite common. You'll hear the muntjac barks any time of year because they breed all year round. But it would be lovely to hear whether you have heard any rutting red deer stags yet where you are. But this is one of what I like to call the bachelor brothers, who have come down from the hill. So I can't wait for their return again. And then I just thought, again, we often are prone to staying inside in winter. But I just wanted to give you a little reminder of why it can be so beautiful to be outside at this time of year. And this was a morning in January. It snowed, and it doesn't really snow here because the salt in the sea air means that the snow and ice doesn't set. But on a particularly cold day, where it did have time to form snow, this is the view out from the croft to the loch, and there's some old sheilings that are there. And sometimes you can get those. I'm not a morning person usually, but at least in winter, I do get to see the sunrise. And it can be really beautiful time of year. And I wondered what you look forward to in winter. It can be a tough time for many people this time of year. And I thought there would be some really good reasons to get outside when it's crisp and snowy and white, when you have that burning sunrise that's really orangey embers. And I wondered if there were things that you look forward to in winter, whether it's the winter waders coming, the geese, the snow, the ice. It can be really difficult to find reasons to love winter if you're a summer person. But I wondered if there were some things that you look forward to. Sometimes I really love looking for colour in winter, like the reds on the holly berries, for example. And so those sorts of things get me outside, and I know that being outside makes me feel better, even when the weather is wild. There's only been one day I've not gone outside when I've been in South Uist because the weather was just beyond 70 miles an hour wind, and I didn't think it was that safe. But usually there is a weather window. I track the weather really carefully to try and find that weather window. But it's always a good idea to try and get outside and find reasons for going outside. And the robins will always be singing in the winter because they start their territory songs earlier than most. And then, as I said, it can get dark here early. But once again, I thought it would be an important reminder that wildlife and being outside in wild landscapes doesn't just have to be a daytime thing. It can be a nighttime thing as well. And one of the things I love to do is stand outside and look up to the skies. And this is just a photo of the harvest moon. That was the full moon we had a few weeks ago in September. And I just thought it was beautiful representation. The moon was a harvest gold. I thought, how apt. But tonight there's meant to be a meteor shower. I don't know if it's clear where you are. So that might be something to look outside. Last night I attempted to photograph the northern lights, and sometimes my photos don't come out, they don't work. But even just standing outside, listening. And last night for once, there was no wind, there was no rain. It was silent, apart from the gurgle of a curlew call down by the lock. There wasn't even any cars driving past, because often there might be, 'cause I live between Boysdale and Dalborough, which is the road that the ferry comes in from, but there wasn't even a single car that went by. And just standing in silence, apart from listening to the wildlife sounds, is just a really beautiful thing to do for your mental health. And looking up to the skies, the full moon, looking out for constellations, Orion. I'm not a very good stargazer, but I know where Orion is and I know where the Plough is. And looking out for the northern lights, there's something really calming and stilling, I think, getting out to a dark spot and looking at the wildlife and the wild weather there. And then I thought this would be a really lovely opportunity just to say, if you would like to follow my nature posts, I post about nature. You can see my photos, and you can see the words I write about the photos on my Instagram. So it's a little nature blog that I often write almost daily. Sometimes I have a little break, but I wanted to just say thank you for being here. Now I'm going to stop sharing now. And I thought what would be lovely is to see whether you had any questions and wanted to share some things that you particularly love about winter. I'm just having a quick look at the comments now because I can see them now. So, that's lovely. You've had waxwings, Lara. That's brilliant that you've had some waxwings. But yeah, I wondered whether anyone had any questions. I thought I'd leave some time for that. I'll give a couple of moments for that to come through. And I thought it would be, I hope you've enjoyed seeing some photos from this part of the UK. It's a lovely part of the world if you're ever tempted to come and visit. As I say, it's full of diverse habitats. You've got the shoreline, you've got the moors, the machair, you've got what's in the sea, the skies. It's a really beautiful place. And I hope it's inspired you to look forward to what might be arriving here on our shores at this time of year. That it is worth going outside in the winter at dusk, in the dark. And if nothing else, I hope that just seeing pictures of nature has been calming and has been a lovely way to spend an hour with me. So I wanted to thank you for joining me, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And by all means, if you want to leave any comments later on, you are more than welcome to do so. I will have a check of the messages, and I hope you'll inspire to come and visit, to get outside, and to venture into your wild spaces where you are. And remember that wildlife is everywhere. It can be on the pavements you walk on, up in the skies at night. One of the things I love about nature is that you're never alone, and there's always something to look at, to connect you, to distract you. It's one of the things that I do to keep my well-being good. is to get outside every day, no matter what the weather. There's always something to look at. I always feel better when I've gone for a walk. They always say that you can solve a problem on a walk. Take a problem with you and it will be solved. So I hope you've enjoyed today. I hope you enjoy the rest of Mindfulness Week. I know there's lots of different events going on. And I'd love to see you on Thursday if you want to do some tidal treasure journaling with me. So thank you very much for coming, and have a lovely day. Thank you.